Chapter 4. True date, June 2nd. Subjective date, May 25th. My God. How many times have I said, my God, in the last 2 days? I awoke on the sofa beside Carol and Mike. The clock indicated 3 in the morning. Chris Turner was on the TV. I didn't know what he was talking about. All I could understand was that he was trying to reassure his viewers that everything was all right and that everything would be explained shortly. What was I doing on the sofa? I'd gone to bed about 11 the night of May 24th, a Saturday. Carol and I had a little quarrel because I'd spent all day working on the Lankers case, and she said that I'd promised to take her to see Nova Express. And so I had, if I finished work before 8, which I obviously had not done. So what were we doing on the sofa? Where had Mike come from? What did Turner mean by saying that today was June 2nd? The tape recorder was on the table near me, but it didn't occur to me to turn it on. I shook Carol awake, and we confusedly asked each other what had happened. Finally, Turner's insistent voice got our attention, and he explained the situation for about the 5th time so far. Later, he said that an alarm clock placed by his ear had awakened him at 2:30. Carol made some coffee, and we drank 4 cups apiece. We talked wildly, with occasional breaks to listen to Turner, before we became half convinced that we had indeed lost all memory of the last 8 days. Mike slept on through it, and finally I carried him up to his bed. His TV was still on. Nate Frobisher, Mike's favorite spieler, was talking hysterically. I turned him off and went back downstairs. I figured out later that Mike had gotten scared and come downstairs to sit with us. Dawn found us rereading the papers from May 24th through June 1st. It was like getting news from Mars. Carol took a tranquilizer to quiet herself down, but I preferred wild turkey. After she'd seen me down 6 ounces, Carol said I should lay off the bourbon. I wouldn't be fit to go to work. I told her that if she thought anybody'd be working today, she was out of her mind. At 7, I went out to pick up the paper. It wasn't there. At 7:45, Joe delivered it. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't stop. All he said, as he pedaled away, was, "It ain't Saturday!" I went back in. The entire front page was devoted to the ball and this morning's events up to 4 o'clock. Part of the paper had been set up before 1 o'clock. According to a notice at the bottom of the page, the staff had awakened about 3. It took them an hour to straighten themselves out, and then they'd gotten together the latest news and made up the front page and some of Section C. They'd have never made it when they did if it wasn't for the computer, which printed justified lines from voice input. Despite what I'd said earlier, I decided to go to work. First, I had to straighten the boys out. At 10, they went off to school. It seemed to me that it was useless for them to do so, but they were eager to talk with their classmates about this situation. To tell the truth, I wanted to get down to the office and the courthouse for the same reason. I wanted to talk this over with my colleagues. Staying home all day with Carol seemed a waste of time. We just kept saying the same thing over and over again. Carol didn't want me to leave. She was too frightened to stay home by herself. Both our parents are dead, but she does have a sister who lives in Hannah, a small town nearby. I told her it'd do her good to get out of the house. I couldn't find out what was happening there because the phone lines were tied up. When I went outside to get in my car, Carol ran down after me. Her long blonde hair was straggling. She had bags under her eyes. She looked like a witch. "Mark! Mark!" she said. I took my finger off the starter button and said, "What is it?" "I know you'll think I'm crazy, Mark," she said, "but I'm about to fall apart." "Who isn't?" I said. "Mark," she said, "what if I go out to my sister's and they forget how to get back? What if I forgot you?" This thing only happens at night, I said. So far, she screamed. So far! Honey, I said, I'll be home early, I promise. If you don't want to go, stay here. Go over and talk to Mrs. Knight. I see her looking out her window. She'll talk your leg off all day. I didn't tell her to visit any of her close friends, because she didn't have any. Her best friend had died of cancer last year, and 2 others with whom she was familiar had moved away. If you do go to your sister's, I said, make a note on a map reminding you where you live and stick it on top of the dashboard, where you can see it. You son of a bitch, she said. It isn't funny. I'm not being funny, I said. I got a feeling. What about? She said. Well, we'll be making notes to ourselves soon, if this keeps up, I said. I thought I was kidding then. Thinking about it later today, I see that this is the only way to get orientated in the morning. Well, not the only way, but it'll have to be the way to get started when you wake up. Put a note where you can't overlook it, and it'll tell you to turn on a recording, which will, in turn, summarize the situation. Then you turn on the TV and get some more information. I might as well have stayed home. Only half of the courthouse personnel showed up, and they were hopelessly inefficient. Judge Payne wasn't there, and never will be. He'd had a fatal stroke at 6 that morning while listening to the TV. Walter Barbendale, my partner, said that the judge probably would have had a stroke sometime in the near future anyway. But this situation must certainly have hastened it. The stock market's about to hit bottom, he said. One more day of this, and we'll have another worldwide depression. And I can't even get through to my broker to tell him to sell everything. If everybody sells, then the market will crash, I said. Are you hanging on to your stocks? I've been too busy to even think about it, I said. You might say. I forgot. That isn't funny. That's what my wife said. But I'm not trying to be funny, though God knows I could use a good laugh. Well, what are we going to do about Linkers? I went over some of the records, he said. We haven't got a chance. I tell you, it was a shock finding out, for the second time, mind you, though I don't remember the first, that our star witness is in jail on a perjury charge. Since all was chaos in the courthouse, it wasn't much use to find out who the judge would be for the new trial for Linkers. To tell the truth, I didn't much care. There were far more important things to worry about than the fate of an undoubtedly guilty murderer. I went to Grover's Rover Bar, which is a block from the courthouse. As an aside, for my reference, or for whoever might be listening to this someday, why am I telling myself things I know perfectly well? Like the location of Grover's? Maybe it's because I think I might forget them someday. Grover's, at least, I remembered well, as I should, since I'd been going there ever since it was built, 5 years ago. The air was thick with tobacco and pot smoke, and the odors of pot, beer, and booze. And noisy. Everybody was talking fast and loud, which is to be expected in a place filled with the members of the legal profession. I bellied up to the bar and bought the DA a shot of wild turkey. We talked about what we'd done that morning, and then he told me he had to release 2 burglars that day. They'd been caught and jailed 2 days before. The arresting officers had, of course, filed their reports, but that wasn't going to be enough when the trial came up. Neither the burglars nor the victims and the officers remembered a thing about the case. Also, the DA said, at 2:10 this morning, the police got a call from the Black Shadow Tavern on Washington Street. They didn't get there until 3:30 because they were too disoriented to do anything for an hour or more. When they did get to the tavern, they found a dead man. He'd been beaten badly and then stabbed in the stomach. Nobody remembered anything, of course, but from what we could piece together, The dead man must have gotten into a drunken brawl with a person or persons unknown shortly before 1 a.m. 30 people must have witnessed the murder. So we have a murderer or murderers walking the streets today who don't even remember the killing or anything leading up to it. They might know they're guilty if they'd been planning it for a long time, I said. He grinned and said, "But he, or they, won't be telling anybody. No one except the corpse had blood on him, nor did anybody have bruised knuckles. 2 were arrested for carrying saps, but so what? They'll be out soon, and nobody, but nobody, can prove they used the saps. The knife was still sticking in the deceased's belly, and his efforts to pull it out destroyed any fingerprints."